Okay, we should be streaming now. So we're just going to give any joiners that are a little bit late a minute or so, and then we will kick off. So please bear with us for a minute or so. Okay, let's kick off. So welcome everybody to the Xcession Vision of IT 2027 webinar. My name's Sunil Duggal. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Xcession. And for those of you that don't know Xcession, we are an IT and enterprise service management consultancy with a portfolio of technology vendors that we work with and a range of customers that we work with to deliver improvements in customer experience, in business agility, in service management, productivity and efficiency across IT and the broader enterprise. The webinar today, we'll have two guests joining us, Mark Twomey and Brian Coleman. We'll get some intros from those guys shortly. As we go through the webinar today, please feel free, if you have any observations, comments, questions, etc., use the chat, and we'll make sure that we try and answer those as we get to the back end of the session. So please, let's make this as interactive as possible. Okay, so to cover off really what we wanted to talk about today. So we think that IT and enterprise service management in 2027 will look very different to the way it does today. And we think that the major driver that's going to deliver that change, and it will be a seismic change, is Agentic AI. So as part of the webinar today, we're going to talk about what does Agentic AI mean, an explanation, but also how we think that that change is going to be facilitated. What we're likely to see is a shift from a reactive ticket-based IT and operations environment to one which is much more intelligent. And we need to think about how organizations shift to an AI-first approach. So as we talk through today, we are going to center a lot of what we talk about in an economy that we think is a good representative environment for this kind of shift. So we're going to talk about Ireland as the sort of central economic environment for this. And we're going to talk particularly around some of the strong sectors within the Irish economy, particularly things like finance and telecoms. And when Mark and Brian introduce themselves, you'll no doubt see why we've picked Ireland as well. And we want to make sure that this is a particularly useful webinar, a useful session for anybody that is taking those practical steps towards Agentic AI and autonomous IT. So we'll talk about some strategies that you need to be thinking about, some strategies that you can engage on. So hopefully that's going to be of use for everyone. Please stick with us, and as we say, make sure that you ask any questions, comments, etc. in the chat. So without further ado, let's introduce my guests here. So Brian, if you wouldn't mind doing an intro.
Yeah, thanks, Sunil. So hi everyone joining or listening in. I'm Brian Coleman. I'm a solution architect here at Xcession. I've been working with ServiceNow around 8 years or more, both here and in previous roles. Multi-certified across ServiceNow applications, including ITSM, ITOM, asset management, and working with the established AI capabilities of ServiceNow, predictive intelligence, machine learning, VA. So I was based in the UK for many years and now landed back in the west coast of Ireland, working with both Irish and UK organisations. So looking forward to this session. Hopefully share some insights into the conversations that we're having around Agentic AI. And yeah, that's me. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Brian. And Mark.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Twomey. I'm the CEO of Xcession. I've got quite a lot of experience in the IT and enterprise service management space over many, many years, having lived and worked in a number of countries such as Ireland, Australia, UK. As you probably guessed, one of the themes of today is around Agentic AI, but also it's around how the impact of that is in Ireland. Both Brian and I are based in Ireland and very, very proud Irish people. So we were really looking forward to explaining our theories and how to get there, but not making it just theoretical. It's also practical about what you can do now and where you want to be by 2027, 2028. Really looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. So a lot of what we'll talk about is, as we said, centered in and around Ireland, but in many ways, what we'll talk about will be applicable in lots of different economies and also lots of different sectors. So I guess we're just using that as a great example, and hopefully this will stimulate some thoughts wherever you may be listening from. So, Brian, we are going to kick off in earnest now. So, from tickets to autonomy, talk us through this shift that we see coming by 2027.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, from tickets to autonomy, it's kind of looking at where it's at right now in terms of what the ticket-driven IT department looks like. I guess the traditional core of IT departments, frontline desk, triaging tickets, firefighting. The IT ticket is basically that atomic unit, I guess, of work where it's structured, it's trackable, it's auditable. But the key thing, the key point on that is that it's reactive. It requires someone to put their hand up and say, well, something is broken. So that's kind of where we are in agentic AI world. That shift is moving towards exception-driven IT, where AI resolves issues silently in the background, and humans really are there to deal with the anomalies where AI needs that human input, which is a very key and important part of agentic AI. But that new frontline is, composed of potentially your agentic AI agents. So your potentially your first line, your second line, and those agents are there to continuously monitor, interpret signals from external data sources, and most importantly, they're enabled to act and take action, autonomously and proactively. So this is where the exception-driven IT, shift is moving towards. Is the IT service desk a thing of the past? I would say not. I would say it's just evolving into greater capabilities with AI and agentic AI. Really, AI is able to pick up a lot of what we'll call the grunt work, I guess, where the mundane, repetitive tasks, auto ranking, alerts, managing signals, mapping assets or CIs to patches, drafting compliance reports. This is where this exception-driven IT model is moving towards.
Okay, we're going to come on shortly to talk much more about what agentic AI is, because I think that probably warrants an explainer. But maybe, Mark, I can just throw this to you. So, Brian's talking about exception-driven IT, but if I'm working, for example, in an insurance business, in the front office, I'm dealing with claims or whatever it may be. So what how to just manifest this a little bit for me? How will I see that change?
Well, in today's world, what tends to happen is that users using an application, they're accessing the application through a desktop. It could be virtual desktop or physical. When they're using that application, if there's an issue with the application based on accessibility or availability, etc., then it becomes unavailable. There's alerts generated probably automatically from where it's monitored, but also the user may contact the service desk via possibly a chat or a phone or even on a portal, for example. So there are multiple channels to that, and the issue gets raised and it goes to the service desk and it goes into the relevant team to investigate, resolve, look at log files, etc. The autonomous IT organization of probably 2027, 2028, right? I would expect that just doesn't happen, right? And the issue when it occurs, messages will be generated, shared with your service management system, which becomes a system of action rather than a system of record, as we talked about. And it will look at the best course of action for the next step to apply to it, look at any run books, identify if there has been any changes, take the best course of action. Should it be like a restart or resolving the change request that was executed to possibly roll it back, for example, taking all the information available to it and seamlessly doing it in the background, so it'll be almost silent to the user, right? In the exceptions where they do have to raise an issue, the channel shift here to multimodal will occur, and to me that's the biggest game changer in service management, is when multimodal becomes ubiquitous. It's the end of the portal. It's the end of certain channels that we have. Voice will be enabled. People will be able to interact with services without having to use a device, if that makes sense. And images can be used to drive action rather than a person having to make a request and adding an attachment, all that stuff. These things will all change. It's going to be huge, right? So from that perspective, I think the biggest thing will be how to manage your multimodal channel of service and how to manage the exceptions, and then who's going to be actually monitoring this, which we're going to talk about a bit more later on. But how the operating model changes when this comes into effect will be huge, right? So the traditional flows we had of alerts, tickets, playbooks, automations, remediations, etc., they will all be far, far, far more autonomous.
Okay.
And as we've said, sorry, Sonal, just in terms of AI is constantly monitoring there in the background, and a lot of these signals that it can interpret that data. I mean, you could take the example of we've got the insurance company or financial services payment system. Could be something like latency is creeping up in the system or memory leak or something like that. You've got that data feeding in constantly, and AI is monitoring that. So before that even becomes a problem, AI will have identified that, and customer organization probably won't even have been an issue potentially. AI will be able to proactively manage it, isolate the process, potentially apply the fix or a patch, and report that as an outcome, and that issue was resolved pre-awareness.
So as if I'm this hypothetical end user in the insurance business that we've got on screen, what you guys are saying to me is my experience changes quite significantly. Firstly, because of the ability of AI to manage the signals, or monitor and then manage the signals that are inbound to it, right? Many of my problems should simply not occur, right? They should be dealt with before they do. But even when they do, and I need to engage, the likelihood is that maybe I'm talking to, recording a message or engaging with a voice chat bot, if that's the right expression, via something like Teams or whatever channel I choose. And it's really only the exception that means that I deal with a person to resolve those issues. Is that right?
I'm a firm believer that, I know what you are, Brian. I'm a firm believer that will happen.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, in that case, let's talk a little bit about, the technology side of things, right? That's facilitating this change. So it's a bit of a busy slide for those watching, so we'll talk through it. But Brian, maybe you can kick us off, right? So talk about how what we deem to be traditional AI is moving towards agentic AI and what those differences are.
Yeah, well, it's about that evolution, isn't it? Not AI as hype, but it's basically it's an operating model shift. In the next year, 2, 3, it's dramatically going to change how IT workforces and leadership, function in enterprises. Traditional, traditional AI is assistive. It predicts and recommends. It's deterministic in its outlook, and in the ServiceNow world, some of those established AI capabilities were around predictive intelligence, machine learning, natural language, virtual agent, and it's that fundamental shift from moving from an assistant technology to basically an autonomous digital collaborator, and that's reshaping, rethinking enterprise systems. So we're effectively entering the agentic era in terms of what advanced AI systems are capable of doing, becoming collaborative partners, taking action on behalf and with people. Agentic AI, by comparison to traditional AI, is looking at perceiving, reasoning within context, is autonomous and has agency, so acts independently. It's not just recommending, but it's executing. And I think Mark mentioned, it's moving ServiceNow from a system of record to a system of action, an execution engine for your agentic AI workflows. One comparison I saw recently, just for the sake of throwing it out there, but thinking about what AI versus agentic AI is, it's a bit like GPS versus self-driving car. GPS knows where to go or where you need to get to. Self-driving car gets you there, and that's kind of where the evolutionary kind of graph is moving, I guess. It becomes that execution engine. The agentic AI tool set within ServiceNow, or the tech stack, if you like, I guess there's kind of a couple of key components just to quickly outline some of those. The agentic workflow is something that is kind of fundamental to that. That's basically the why. That's the use case that's being solved with agentic AI. The AI agent orchestrator is effectively managing and coordinating those AI agents in the background, calling and managing those as they're needed through the agentic AI workflow. And the AI agents themselves, there could be multiple agents that are part of an agentic workflow. Each of those are responsible for a specific task or outcome. So each of those have a specific purpose, and those are called in sequence or as needed through the workflow orchestrator. And each of those agents have AI tools which they can call on, which is bringing in, in taking action, calling workflows, subflows, pulling data into ServiceNow to achieve those outcomes. So yeah, in terms of agentic AI, becomes that enterprise nervous system. All of that data is ingested in real time signals. It can interpret and execute those orchestrations. So yeah, very, very powerful.
Mm-hmm. And Mark, so we've so far really talked about, I guess, IT use cases for agentic, but actually we don't just need to think about IT, do we? We have all sorts of business operations and business functions that can be supported in this way, can't they?
Yeah, exactly. So we talk a lot about IT, and autonomous IT is a North Star, and it is a North Star, but in order to hit autonomous IT, you also have to be able then to deliver the same outcomes for each line of business across your organization. So it's where it's coming back to really, which is agentic AI is a company strategy aligned to your overall company strategy that supports the outcomes you're looking to achieve. And then each area in your business, be they IT, HR, security, finance, operations, etc., and legal, they would all be underpinning that. So that's where I think we talk a lot about the ServiceNow platform and the ServiceNow AI platform, because it actually enables you to achieve outcomes for all of your business, not just in IT. But what we see is IT, and it's quite obvious. There's a lot of articles out there at the moment about organizations where IT and HR are merging together. to identify what's they were defining as work, and then who needs to do that work and how that work is done is being kind of reassessed, and that's where Brian talked about the shift of operating models. But IT is going to be an enabler in the organization and a value creator. It's kind of almost like, in some ways, that was always the goal of IT, which is to deliver value and drive value in an organization. I think Agentic AI is going to be the biggest enabler of that we've ever seen, right? Because IT will be providing and enabling the digital workforce to sit alongside the existing workforce and to be amplifying those people to be better, to deliver more outcomes, to think more strategically, to deliver new services, to understand where there were constraints before that they don't have to work in those constraints. Yeah, and I know that can be debated, but I personally feel that a lot of constraints that exist today in industry and in how you do work will start to be removed over time.
Just on that one, Mark, just springs to mind, and I think there could be many numbers of examples of, you talk about the potential for work amplification. Again, it's changing mindset there, and where you have teams creating, just as an example, say knowledge or knowledge management, that shift could be in an agent generating multiple drafts of enterprise-ready specific knowledge that a knowledge team has, the ability to review, and changes the level of productivity there in terms of an amplification enabler.
Yeah, it's huge. I agree, Brian. It's huge. I think that kind of like continuous learning loop that we've all maybe looked to achieve, particularly in IT over the years, that would be accelerated and amplified now. And the knowledge manager, the role of the knowledge manager within an organization becomes hugely important, because essentially what you're doing is you are feeding the agents as well. Like, so the agents will suggest the articles based on the information they have available to it. Now that will improve over time, and it will become far more streamlined. And the human in the loop element of that then enables you to then include things like guardrails, etc. So we'll talk about this as we move through the rest of the webinar, but the responsible AI and the ability to apply guardrails and risk management protocols to what you're trying to do is also very important. Yeah. All right. So we can't let it run wild, if that makes sense. But we'll talk about that too a lot as we go along this. Right.
Yeah. Let's before we move on to that piece, because I think that is that is so fundamental to engendering trust, isn't it? And trust is really going to be we believe that trust can be achieved, and so that becomes the enabler in many ways for organizations to make investments. But there is another piece here around people, isn't there? And what impact removing some of this repetitive work from individuals has, and also then the ability for Agentic to pick up so many of the use cases that you've just talked about. So maybe, Brian, I'll just pass over to you again to lead on this one. So tell us a little bit about what you see, within IT, I think we're looking at, but, the change of responsibilities and roles that people will have.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a lot of I would say maybe concern and perhaps well founded in many ways in certain respects, but realistically, when you're looking at AI, when we talk about expected decline, you're looking at a decline of routine roles and tasks where the focus of effort is changing. So where repetitive, predictable work and tasks can be better and more efficiently undertaken by AI, it's inevitably going to mean a rethinking of support levels, and so first, second line supports, where the burden on those teams is going to change and shrink in terms of what it looks like right now versus to what it's going to move towards. But the key to that is, while those objectives change, it's introducing a whole new possibility around human and AI collaboration, and that's where you're going to get real innovation. AI agents handling, the routine, the grunt work, as we call it, humans driving that innovative aspect, reimagining and creating those new roles that will be needed for AI working in collaboration with people. That'll be AI orchestrators. These are emerging roles, governance leads, prompt engineers. So there'll be shift in, what the current definition of roles may evolve. Engineers may become more strategists, service desk agents, more customer experience managers, security teams freed up to focus on, more creative threat modeling, and AI fundamentally handling the workflow and routine data management. So it's really, for me, a combination of AI's analytical power, but requiring that human critical thinking element. That is key, and that judgment, and that's the recipe for success in my eyes, because it's getting that balance right. It's getting that overview and responsible use. So there's going to be a leadership shift in mentality, I think, around measuring outcomes. It's not just ticket volumes. We're talking about leading change culturally to bring about this collaboration, and not just technically. So thinking about strategic AI portfolio management. What will that look like from a leadership perspective? Outcome-based KPIs. And change, driving that change leadership within organizations, managing the cultural shift, and inspiring that trust in AI and agentic AI.
Can we pick up maybe a little bit? It's very interesting. Let's pick up a little bit, if it's okay with you, Mark, on the role of tomorrow's IT leaders. Brian mentioned that there's going to have to be some shifting in the way IT leadership will think. What does that mean in practice, do you think?
First of all, right, so there's a lot to this, in my opinion, but I actually think the digital transformation of agentic AI is far easier than the business transformation of agentic AI, right? And what I think needs to happen now is coming back to, first of all, your strategy. Alignment of that strategy to your overall company strategy is critical, because that will then drive the prioritization of what you need to essentially look at and achieve in that context. Setting up your governance frameworks at the start is I think it's the most important thing you can do when you look at agentic AI, right? Yeah, understanding, things like regulatory compliance around the EU-AI Act, ISO 42000, etc. They're all very, very critical, important things to be looking at. Maintaining an inventory of your agentic systems and agentic tools, right, is critical. You have to enable that so you can apply continual risk to this. And bear in mind, this is probably going to be a faster moving and changing organization than we've ever seen before. So the continual management of risk and oversight of governance on these agentic systems is critical. So that's a key thing for me. The other thing I think is very important, and even in Xcession we're doing this now, is like the constant training of people to understand more about AI and agentic AI and how they can use that in their day-to-day jobs. That has to start now, right? There's no reason why anyone wouldn't do that. It's a foundational skill that's required now, and everyone needs to be trained in it, so that they can then understand how they can use those tools and use the capabilities to amplify themselves and do more, right? And everything has to be measured, right? So I think you need to start measuring everything now, right? So we're going to have to measure what these systems do, every interaction they have, but also what KPIs. It's a redefinition of KPIs also. So an outcome could be, for example, a reduction in mean time to resolve, right? That's the overall outcome of this agentic system. But there's, as Brian said, there's multiple tools involved in that, multiple agents involved in that outcome, and it's all underpinned by good data. So get your people trained, get your data ready for AI, building a data catalog and an inventory of your data, and then identifying the most important use cases that you can pilot to support your overall strategy is very, very important. Right?
Yeah. Actually, you touched on something there, and there's a question that's come in from Yarrow about how will people starting in IT service management gain the required basic skills to understand whether AI is hallucinating or not. So you talked about continual learning, and in fact, this is a foundational skill. How do you see, Mark? How would you answer Yarrow's question?
I think that where we are at the moment, though, is it requires the human in the loop in relation to AI is hugely important, right? Yeah, I would say everyone who's used an LLM that's out there today would have said, I got a response at one time and said, sorry, that's totally wrong, right? That needs to still exist, right? So we can have a lot of content being generated, etc. That needs to be reviewed, and that's why governance is important. I think also to your question, Yarrow, I think guardrails are very important. So to reduce hallucination, we need to make sure that the guardrails that you apply to every single system are really, really analyzed. Yeah. And that's why piloting of these systems, so people can review what's coming back. We've done some interesting things using the Google ADK, and we've identified quite a few things around hallucinations that occur as well. So it is quite interesting. There is hallucinations tend to be when your guardrails are not at the level they seem to be. All right. So that's why I think, to answer your question, understanding guardrails, applying guardrails to your agents are critical to do this. Right. It's more a reframing your question, if I would say. Right.
Yeah. Okay. You talked a bit about data. So let's talk a bit more about data, because I think this is a fundamental, isn't it? It's underpinning. So we've used in this webinar ServiceNow as an example, right? And they talk about a data fabric. So maybe, Brian, just help people understand what we mean when we talk about a data fabric, and what kind of data, right, is being brought in to build that mesh of information.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, AI needs fuel. Data is the fuel. There, in ServiceNow, we talk about the workflow data fabric, and that's the concept of connecting all your data wherever it resides, and bringing that into one unified platform in ServiceNow. And this is breaking down those business data silos that tend to exist through that real-time integrated layer of data. So it's constantly ingesting those signals from many external sources, ITOM, SecOps, customer systems, IoT, and that's continuously monitored and continuously updated. So that's using external enterprise data in real time, and that's secure. There is also within ServiceNow the zero copy connectors, so that's another aspect of the technology, and that's effectively securely and without copying, accessing that data for the use and purposes of agentic AI. So that's a very powerful feature as well, and that's moving from traditional concepts of data and what we think of data in both, in many senses in ServiceNow, in knowledge management. So that's data built for humans. Thinking about what data is required to support AI, what data it needs to consume, which is that machine readable, continuously learning, that, as Mark mentioned, that wheel is constantly churning in terms of the more data, the more quality data it gets, the more efficient it becomes. And it's investing in that AI assisted knowledge and using it as a force multiplier, as we've said. So that data is the fuel. It needs proper governance as part of that, and I'm sure we're going to come on to that in more detail. But that governance by design, and that data fabric is supported by other aspects in ServiceNow around CMDB being the digital repository, the configuration management database, as well as the CSDM, Common Service Data Model, which is a conceptual framework for the modeling of services and business services in an enterprise platform such as ServiceNow. So it's having an awareness of what data AI requires and uses, and ensuring that that data feed and throughput is coming in to serve the the business outcomes that your agentic AI is trying to achieve.
Can I ask a couple of questions to you, Brian, just to follow up on this concept? So at the moment, business or data in an organization is typically constrained within the context of business rules or business workflow. In the future, does that model need to apply, or can we consume much more unstructured data to build out this, this capability?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the powers, I guess, of what AI is going to be able to do in working with data. It's breaking down those data silos across business, across applications. One quote I heard around AI recently, and it has struck with me. I think it was Jeff Bezos, and he mentioned AI was like the new electricity, and by that he meant it was this horizontal enabling layer where effectively you're reaching across platforms, industries, business, and it's opening up the potential across all of those areas where optimizing processes and unlocking new efficiencies where previously the data silo was a barrier to that. Agentic AI is opening up the potential for discovering these new efficiencies. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a bit about governance then. Maybe Mark will direct this sort of slightly tricky question, I think, to you. So in our journey here, we've put a lot of data into a single or certainly a consolidated set of data repositories, whether that's via something like Zero Copy in ServiceNow or whether that's in your Oracle database, whatever it may be, right? How are we going about applying governance, those guardrails, to how we then use this data for agentic AI?
It's a very, very interesting subject, in my opinion. I think it's probably as important as any technology, I think, around this. Yeah, I do think there's the role of the EU AI Act in relation to agentic systems in the future is going to be massive, right? And that's obviously a risk-based approach where a lot of AI systems could be risk-based. In IT, possibly less, but in some other areas they could be higher risk, so they will obviously have to be risk assessed in that context. But there's a continual risk assessment required then. So I think that's where your ISO 42000 comes in. That's a hugely important area that people should look at. My own personal feeling is that there's a huge competitive advantage to be gained by adherence to these regulatory requirements starting now, all right? So rather than having people going off building agents and the like, I think there needs to be a governance step in place beforehand all this happens. It's a bit like how ISO 27000 is a management system that we use across IT and security at the moment. We need the same concepts to be applied to agentic AI, right? So I think setting that framework up in place is important. Having ethical and responsible AI principles, having an inventory of your agentic systems, tools, and workflows is hugely important. It's a bit like having a CMDB. You can't manage and treat and support anything unless you know about it. It's in your CMDB, for example. We will need the same concepts to agentic systems, right? And risk will become a bit more, in my opinion, continually managed, right? Rather than periodically managed, I suppose is what I would call it at the moment. Yeah, it's the risk element to this will change slightly because it will have to be far more continual because the pace of change will be so fast.
I think, Mark, it's governance by design there, isn't it? It's understanding. Well, why did it act in that way? Was it within policy? Was it an override, or what's the audit capability? It's making sure you have all of that up front and implemented to ensure that you're compliant and used responsibly.
Yeah, and I think adding the guardrails, and we talked about before as well, is hugely important because they have to be treated as almost like your assets now, because you have to really respect those guardrails, and whatever guardrails you have, they may not still be enough. So you have to test, pilot, review, measure, analyze a lot of these elements, continually, and that's why the risk element is so important here, right? Because there is a danger. We talked about all the positives, but there are dangers also that you have to be fully aware of, right?
And surely many of the policies that you're talking about here already exist within organizations. They might require more work, but modern slavery, or your HR or employee guidelines that exist, your something like your marketing social media guidelines, whatever those sorts of things. Actually, many of those policies are defined today, aren't they? So organizations are not starting this piece completely from scratch, are they?
No, I agree. There's a lot of that in place as it is, right? But I do think it's being very much aware of your agentic systems, the agents that you have, and then what tools are available to them, and probably even more importantly, what agency you're applying to that agent. Yeah. So the level of agency would increase over time, and as we increase that agency to those agents, the level of risk also may increase. Okay.
Yeah, and not to quote one of our experts on the webinar today, but Mark, I seem to remember you saying that one of the key things here is to be very clear about defining what your agent is not. Yes, you need to define what it is, but also be very clear about what it is not, to reduce the risk of any non-conformity, right, in terms of the guardrails that you set.
Yeah, I think the guardrails are very important, and it reduces potentially the amount of hallucination that Yara mentioned in his query also, because if you can tighten the scope, but basically the scope is a bit like agency, I suppose, Brian, is the term that's used, isn't it, in the industry for this? Yeah, so we're tightening the agency that's applied to the agents initially, and then we give it more agency as we go along, right? Yeah, but we continually measure and monitor and understand the risk of it increasing that agency, and how that risk would be then measured and mitigated should it occur. Okay.
Indeed. Okay. So we've talked a bit about the underpinning technology here, Agentic AI. We've talked about some of the people transformation requirements, and then the data knowledge and governance piece. So let's actually then come back to our use case of Ireland as an economy where this is particularly relevant. So Brian, over to you. Right, tell us a little bit about why we think Ireland is a great example, can show the way for others to follow.
Yeah, I mean, well, Ireland is kind of uniquely positioned in many ways, isn't it? I mean, we know that it's a hub of regulated industries. It's got many multinational operations, many innovation centres, and many examples up and down the country of companies with centres of excellence in AI related areas. So you've got the pedigree there in terms of the skilled workforce. We're already seeing, as widely reported around, there's high enterprise adoption within Ireland around adopting AI technology within enterprise. I think it's just come up on the screen there, the adoption has surged in the last 12 months alone, nearly doubling from what it was in 2024. So, and these are on the back of, studies recently in terms of what AI means to the Irish economy, and potentially what that adoption rate means. So in the next 10 years, it could be upwards of 250 billion in terms of a figure, throwing that out around. Obviously, that's a big number. So it just shows the potential for what AI can do to achieve, these, big financial results, I guess, in terms of the efficiencies that it's capable of generating. So Ireland, obviously, then as well, being at the forefront of the EU AI regulation, as Mark has mentioned, that's quite a key, a key area to be one of the first 6 member states to, designate competent authority around that. So quite important, and industries are going to lead both in Ireland and globally differently within the next couple of years for the reasons we mentioned in terms of the shift in agentic AI and where that's moving things. So, the benefits for for Irish organizations are in building that resilience, attracting and retaining the talent, and using AI for achieving that competitive advantage, where create those efficiencies, discover those efficiencies, and start with AI piloting in terms of getting that rolled out and getting ahead, be one of the early adopters in terms of ensuring those benefits are achievable.
Are there any examples maybe you could give that sort of highlight how actually Irish organizations, enterprises are starting to take up this challenge?
Yeah, I mean, across the sectors, you can see around the financial sectors, you're seeing use cases around, reducing downtimes and moving towards regulator-ready reporting. That's kind of specific to that sector. In telecoms, it's probably around network resilience and the kind of exception-driven model that we were talking around customer fixes and that type. Pharma, you're looking at self-healing infrastructure. And even in public sector, we're seeing the emergence of what AI is doing to play a role there in changing those services. So I mean, all the way down to your SMEs, and in terms of I would say AI still has a potential to level the playing field in many respects for SMEs as well, in terms of what those efficiencies are applicable. So we're seeing use cases up and down the country. We're seeing large retailers talking about how they're beginning to use AI in the face of increasing costs and economic headwinds, and as a driver to continue growing, as well as make those efficiencies, but deliver the same, adhere to that kind of personal service that they've become known for. So it's I would say it's applicable across industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think we're sort of coming towards the end of the webinar. So I think let's start having a think about what organizations need to be thinking about to move this forward, right? So maybe Mark, we can give us an idea of we've got a 3-year roadmap here. What the components of this 3 years are, and then we'll loop back to you, Brian, after Mark's taken us through that with some things that organizations should do today. So have a think about that. But Mark, over to you first.
Yeah, we've put a lot of thought into this in Xcession, and we think that like you have on the screen here, that there's a multi-year roadmap for execution of this, because the North Star essentially is autonomous IT, right? Whether that's 27 or 28, maybe some organizations may move even further than that. That is the North Star. There will be parts of that become autonomous. It's not saying full autonomy by then, but there'll be parts of it will happen by 27, 28, and the percentage of that will increase. But to achieve that, you need to think about how to transform your organization to align to that, right? Which is, like I said, more of a business transformation than a digital transformation, in my opinion. So from that perspective, if you were to start in year 1, I would say get the foundations in place correct, which is strategy, your governance setup in place, your management systems in place to assess risk. Start as you mean to continue. Don't start with as if you have 1 to 5 agents. Start as if you've got 500 agents, 1,000 agents. Who knows? When you've done that foundation in place, and you've also, the foundation I would do is a lot of training for staff. Right? There needs to be people need to be upskilled to be aware of Gen AI and LLMs and how Agentic AI can support them, how it can amplify what they do. Right? So I think what we're trying to do here is unlock a lot of potential in people rather than actually change everything too much. We're unlocking the potential of your existing workforce. Getting that in place, and then understanding a data catalog, which is what data do I have today, how clean and how effective is that data to be able to use in workflows from an Agentic AI perspective, and assessing that in all places, to ensure then that you have your foundations in place. There may be a preparedness phase after your foundations assessment to understand where you are and to take action on some of those elements. But I would also then, in parallel to that, start to look at what are the key use cases that you want to achieve that will align to your overall strategy and where Agentic AI can add value, right? And you need almost like a checklist of things to say, well, is this a pilot for technology fund's sake, or is this a pilot that this can be used in the organization and expanded out, right? The question to ask yourself is, how does it align to a new operating model? How does it amplify my existing staff's expertise? How does it take away mundane tasks that they're doing today and give them the time to think and unlock the potential that they have, right? Because that's a key inhibitor today. They're the things I would look at. And I would look at piloting them so you can measure, see how effective they are, understand the impact on the business change and the impact on teams and how they work, right? And then from that perspective, once you've done your first kind of 3 to 5 pilots, I would really then start to look at how do I plan to scale this and orchestrate this across the organization, where essentially what I would be looking at doing is to try and achieve a center of excellence, which is responsible for delivery of agentic systems in the organization using platforms that are available to it in the organization. Because bear in mind, agents will be using multiple platforms, and the agent-to-agent protocol will be used extensively. So, in an ideal scenario, that's the kind of roadmap I'd look at, right? But it's transformational, but it has to come from the top down from a strategy perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Because the risk of not doing anything is potentially existential. Other organizations will take a lead. Newcomers, new entrants into the market will eat up market share, will deliver new services, potentially better price points or greater value points to customers. So actually action is really important here.
Big time. And I would say that, like I said, I'm a big believer that there are certain constraints in industries today that will be removed. And things like hours of operation, language, etc. All these things become less inhibiting than they are today, if that makes sense. When the introduction of multimodal becomes more ubiquitous, I think it's huge, right? I think it's massively transformational. And I think the companies that are the pace setters in this area, the ones that are doing the pilots now and getting their organization structure in place, we work with various companies in Xcession, and I can tell you some companies that I've never had a discussion with them whatsoever about what their AI strategy is, and some companies have the most robust, responsible AI strategies I've ever come across so far. So it's already happening out there, right? So I think you need to be aware. I think you need to do this. I think it's going to impact you if you don't, and I think the ones that do this and implement the right strategies with the right management systems, I think the ISO side of things and the adherence to the EU AI Act are hugely important because they give you competitive advantage in the future also.
Yeah. Okay. Brian, other than emailing brian.coleman@xcession.co.uk, if you're a ServiceNow customer in Ireland, what do you think that customer should do today to get started on this journey? Mark's talked about some big items there, but what do you think practical steps to do right today?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, practical steps, Sunil. I mean, it's getting down to business really. Audit your processes for readiness. What do they look like? Align your use cases with your business priorities. It comes back to Mark talking about roadmap and strategy. It's getting that understood. Identify those candidates. Where are you going to get those from? Where is the most business value? Is it service desk? Is it IT ops? Start with the contained pilots. Mark mentioned that very clearly, and I 100% agree. Pilot, in low risk domains. Start small, iterate fast, break and learn, and get using the technology. Make sure you're thinking about investing in your data and you understand what unified data is. Identify those silos and break those down. Using those frameworks like CSDM. And Mark mentioned previously, but ensuring the clean, secure, well-governed data. That's basically where you want to get to. Embed the guardrails, get your policies done, nice and early. So what are your define your AI action rules, as I would call it? What are your rules of engagement in terms of using AI and agentic AI? What can it do? What can't it do for your organization? Build governance from the start, set the foundations, and upskill your workforce. It's a bit on that point that we had there in terms of gaining that basic skills to understand what AI is, what the technology is, what its capabilities are, upskill those workforce, and get ready for those role changes. So if it was a Monday morning action, I would say identify your top 5 routine workflows if possible, pilot virtual agent for 2 of those for a couple of months, 2-3 months, establish governance in a working group, and get your foundations in place.
Very good. Or a Tuesday afternoon action.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've come to the end, but one question that we've just had in, which is that, and to perhaps balance this out a little bit, is to say, well, if you're not a ServiceNow customer, and clearly ServiceNow has a great agentic AI capability, but if you're not, what do you suggest? It sounds like a similar set of answers, really.
I think the foundation and the foundation work streams that we talked about there are exactly the same, Sunil, right? I think the technology and the tooling can come out of a foundation assessment to understand what you have available to you and what you can execute on, but the foundations are still the same, right? What do I need to do from a strategy perspective? What do I need to set up from a governance perspective? What is my data like today, right? Where's my data catalog? How effective is that data? How can I use that data in my workflows? And how can agentic AI exploit that data to achieve the outcomes I require? They are all technology irrelevant or independent of that, right? And then, the upskilling of people is required. All of those things are very, very key, right? We're working on an assessment where you can actually see where you are today, take actions from that, and get to a place where you need to be able to be when you can actually start to do pilots, right? So it's very important that we actually look at that, and it's applicable to any technology. And I think ServiceNow is quite ahead of the game when it comes to agentic AI, but everyone else will probably catch up over time. But the ability to execute cross business function within the ServiceNow AI platform is at the moment second to none.
Very good. Okay. I think that is all we have time for today. So to Brian and Mark, thank you ever so much for your insights and your incredibly valuable view in terms of where this journey can take us, this route to autonomous IT, and the building blocks that you've outlined to take us on that journey. To our audience, thank you ever so much for joining us today. That's been fantastic. We really appreciate you investing this time with us. If you'd like to reach out, info@xcession.co.uk or brian.coleman, mark.twomey or Sunil.Duggal will find us as well. And we'd love to spend some time with you and just talk about how we can support some of that journey. We will have much more of this content coming out around agentic AI capability and this journey to autonomous IT. So we look forward to the next time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, everyone.